So this morning we are going to finish the series that we started a few weeks ago where we're looking at the heart of Jesus and what he saw as his mission and by extension our mission too, to bring people into relationship with him, to care about what he has called the lost. And we looked at three passages in the gospel specifically to help us kind of to curate it a little bit about what it is that we might struggle with personally. And with the mission that Jesus gave us, first one we maybe talked about some tips and things of how to do it. We talked last week about just really living it out. Today, we're going to talk about maybe what we should have at the beginning, but I think is a really good wrap up as well, about why we're even doing this. Matter of fact, if you're following along in your outline, the very first, why are we sharing our faith? And when we look at the why of it all, it's in famous passage. We're going to be looking in Luke 15. If you brought a Bible with you, you can do that. I'm going to encourage you, as usual, to read that passage throughout at this week, the entire passage. We'll read the first few verses. But it's very famous kind of images and parables that Jesus tells about the lost coin, the lost sheep, and then, of course, what is often called the parable of the prodigal son. And we're just going to ask why. And we're going to find it here in this passage. So let's start by reading at least the first 12 verses in chapter 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home, and then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep.' I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or, suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin.' And in the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." And then Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them." So this is famous, and it hints at exactly why we do what we do in sharing our faith. The idea of talking and sharing with others, as opposed to what? As opposed to, a lot of different options. Quietly live our own faith in our own way and show the world what a great life is. No, there's this idea of talking and sharing. And why do we do that? Why is that our mission, to actually physically speak to people about the gospel? Or maybe to really get at it, I want to ask the question another way that was asked by Tim Keller. A lot of this information has really was informed by a sermon that he gave and that back in the 90s when I was there in New York. And it's just, here's the way I maybe ask a question to get at it a little bit differently. Why did Jesus argue with people? I think often in times we don't often think about the fact that Jesus argued. As a matter of fact, I even heard a sermon once. It embarrassed Lexi to no end. She invited me one day when I was on vacation. I went to a church, and we sat really close up front, and the pastor began to preach, and he says, "Yeah, Jesus never really argued with people." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's not true." And Lexi's like, "Shh." Like telling me, I'm like, okay, yeah, that probably wasn't the best time to... But in any case, the truth is that he did argue. We often forget that this happens, right? Right at the beginning of the passage, you have these Pharisees that were muttering, and Jesus is like, "I'm going to just deal with this. We're going to argue about this. We're going to fight about it." And we did a lot of that. The rich young ruler who wanted to test him, or last week when we looked at The story of the Good Samaritan was because a biblical scholar, wanted to argue and test him. There's this argument, there's this idea of saying something that's a little bit conflicting, if not outright conflicting, with a lot of what was understood by the people Jesus was talking to. Why? Why would we bother doing that? Well, I think it's important to understand how it is as people we come to shift how we think. Because however it arrives, we end up very culturally specific, a lot to do with our upbringing, a lot of things. We have these ways of thinking, these paradigms, these grids by which we view the world. And when we get evidence and when we get things, we fit it within that grid. We often do, and it informs how we approach everything. How does that change? How is it that those grids or those categories or those understanding ever change? One of my favorite examples is in a book by Kuhn called Revolutions, or the Structure of Scientific Revolution. The reason I think this is important, it's about 50 plus years old, it was written in the late 60s. But he's talking about science, and I think science is such a great category to use in our modern discussions, because I know a lot of folks who are, the philosophical term is called positivists. So they believe that we would best form our society if we could just build society on evidence and rationality and science. And the science people would rule us, so to speak, or at least science. And I follow this woman who is an astrophysicist, and she writes a lot of articles about her faith and these kind of things. And talks, it says, it's really fascinating because you would think, the idea that one of the things that's wonderful about science is it's self-correcting. We had a lot of wrong things in the past, and then somebody comes along and there's new evidence and we accept these new things, and now that's the understanding. And her whole point is you don't want to build a society based on something that could change at any moment. But in any case, the thing is even that idea that we just self-correct and change is not really how science works. At least in terms of the consensus, and scientists also have these grids, have these paradigms, have these ways of thinking, and Kuhn is describing how that changes. So, for example, let's take one we are all familiar with, and that is kind of the Copernican revolution, the idea of planetary motion, right? Maybe you're not that familiar. But initially, the ancient people were really, really good at kind of predicting, where the stars would be at any given time of the year and that kind of stuff, even though they didn't really understand planetary motion. They didn't understand that the sun was the center of our solar system and that things revolved around there. They had a system to understand, the Ptolemy system, that had the earth as the center, and they could very accurately describe within these circles and these mini circles and all these things. They had this whole grid of understanding of how the stars moved around the earth, how the sun and the moon moved around the earth, and could predict where it's going to be at any given time. Very predictive, as science would think. We make an observation, we make a prediction, the prediction true, therefore it holds. And yet, as Copernicus comes up and some others who say, well, okay, but we're seeing some things that don't quite fit. And what do we do with those things that don't quite fit? Well, we move them into the grid. We add that to our algorithms and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't for a while until somebody suggests, like Copernicus famously, that's like, what if we're actually, the earth is revolving as well? Now, here's the thing that it's really important that I don't think we often understand about this time. First of all, when Copernicus first does this, he wasn't very good at predicting what would happen. Like when they said, okay, if this is the cycle, if this is how it works, then you predict where things are going to be. And he was nowhere near as good or precise as the Ptolemists were. They already had a system that was much more accurate than anything he had come up with. So even though we accepted now that he was right, he wasn't as clear and predictive. But they kept, over time, it added more and more evidence, more and more things they couldn't fit into their grid, until eventually there was this spark of a revolution that says we change how we think about this altogether. Okay, well, where does this fit in? Notice how human knowledge, built upon this idea of rationality and evidence, still doesn't go, oh, here's new evidence, let me rethink everything. It's not how we operate. We get bits and pieces, and our tendency is to fit that into categories that we already understand, that we already know. And then it builds, and we get another piece, and that fits in. Or maybe we discard it and reject it altogether till at some point, boom, something shifts, something changes, whether it's in society as a whole or more importantly as in individuals. That's how, and I think why Jesus was arguing. He's over and over. He wants to tell people, here's this. You need to understand this. Here's this. Understand this. And they would take maybe it really means this, and maybe it means that, and put it in their own categories till eventually it breaks through. We do this with Jesus himself, though. We do this, and the people of the time did it with the things of God. You know what? Let me break into history. I didn't know if I was going to. So, when Rome took over this region and the Jewish state that was otherwise, that when they took over, there was a lot. The Jews kind of fit themselves into different camps on how to deal with this. Right? In different ways, different grids, different mind frames of how to work. And you had groups like the Essenes who said, you know what? Forget all them. Who cares what they're doing? They're pagans and whatever, and we have nothing to do, and we've lost power, but you know what? We're just going to go into this little enclave, and we're going to build our lives the way we want to live, and forget the rest of the world, and we're just going to do it the right way, and we have these little communities, and we're going to be this holy people set aside from everybody else. You had that group. But then you had another group, the Sadducees, who, for want of a better term, basically kind of made nice with Romans. They ended up going into places of power. They ended up ruling the Sanhedrin, what little power they had. But in trade, they were pretty secularized. They'd given up on the idea of miracles and heaven and a lot of stuff, saying this, we're just going to be part of the system and have a nice religious part of being part of the system. Right? So you have this group, and then of course you have a group like the Pharisees. And often we see Jesus arguing with the Pharisees, but the Pharisees were this nice group of people that just said, you know what? No, we're going to do both. We'll be involved with the community, but we're also going to really try to make sure our folks and our people are really living faithfully to what God says. And they have, like I said, the New Testament, because Jesus is arguing with them a lot, come off as these anti-people to Jesus, which happens, but I just want you to understand that they were the nice middle-class people, the ones that were the good guys, that were on the right side of history, that had felt good about their place in the world. And so, and they too would take what Jesus would say about God and try to fit it in their categories. So what you're really saying is this, Jesus. What you're really saying, we see that all over. We see different people arguing, and sometimes they don't like it because it doesn't fit, so they go against him. The Sadducees are going to argue with Jesus about what marriage looks like in heaven, or whatever it is, and they're trying to fit it in this framework, and we do this too. How many times have you maybe heard somebody say, Christianity generally, Jesus specifically, just kind of like all other major religious founders, he's just telling us we just really need to love each other. And that's what true Jesus really meant, is we just need to be loving to people. Well, and even without a full understanding of what love means, you've heard people say that, right? Maybe you've heard other people argue, so, Jesus, just kind of like all the others, he's kind of saying some things that other people have said. He's trying to establish a moral code, a new way of living, a different idea of rules, and some of it shifted from what Judaism was and to this new Christian idea, and he's telling us the right way of living. That's really what Jesus did. And I think what Jesus is doing with arguing, he's arguing over and over. He's saying, no, you don't understand. You're trying to fit me in your little grid. I am saying something that has never been said before. I am saying something that is wildly different than these other ideas of just be a good person or just be a loving person or whatever it is that you put. I am saying something really, really different that is so much bigger than this, and I'm going to have to point it out over and over and over until it eventually breaks through in this revolution of discovery in your mind. The reason Jesus kept arguing is if for no other reason than without the conflict, we get stuck. We get stuck in our grids. We get stuck in our paradigms. We get stuck in and just about every single person you meet has this grid that they look at life and understand how entrenched that is. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, right? Because we don't know everything. We have to understand life through our paradigms, through our grids. I am absolutely convinced the earth is round. I have never once circumnavigated it. I have never been around. It fits within everything. And if you are one of those people who want to suggest, well, the earth's flat, I have to tell you, chances are I'm going to reject you out of hand. It's silly. It's dumb. It doesn't fit with anything I have to say. If you even try to posit it, I'm going to suggest that I probably don't find anything else you say credible. However, maybe there's some evidence. Maybe there's something, and then it would take a huge amount. And so it's not just that I have this grid, and that a correct grid, it is somewhat entrenched. So with that, we easily get stuck and we don't truly listen to Jesus. And this is what he is saying in these stories. He is breaking through, saying, you've got to hear something radically different here. The first thing he is saying that is true in all of these stories is that people, even sinners, are absolutely valuable. He's trying to get them unstuck. See, when we see each of these parables, there are some common themes. Every one of them talks about something being lost, something being found, and there being a party about it. You see that theme in every single one, whether it's the lost sheep, the lost coin, what's called the prodigal son. Like, you see those themes over and over and over. And that's what he's getting at. But what you need you to hear, he says, you've got to understand how absolutely valuable. Because remember, what were the Pharisees? They were attacking Jesus because they didn't like what he was saying. It didn't fit in their grid. What did he do that didn't fit? Do you remember? It's right there at the beginning of the passage. Yes, he was eating with sinners. He was hanging out with sinners. That basically the Pharisees, remember, good middle-class folks, and just saying, hey, Jesus, looks like you're soft on sin. Like, there are these people that clearly don't qualify, and you're being soft on that. And Jesus says, okay, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you 3 stories to get the idea that over and over, and one of the things you find is that this is absolutely valuable. That what it is that is lost is heavily valued. Right? That's obvious in the one with the coin. It doesn't matter that she has 9 other coins. She wants every last coin. And says, it matters. This one matters. It's valuable to me, and I will do whatever it takes to find that because I need it. Maybe less clear to a modern audience, but certainly to an ancient audience, the idea of a lost sheep. I don't care if you have 99 other sheep. You have this one sheep that's gone. You want that one back. It matters. It's valuable. And we're going to search, and we're going to find it. We're going to take it. Maybe even more clear to us, but certainly clear to the idea of a son that is no longer part of the family. How desperate a father who's going to run out to see him eventually. That how absolutely valuable. And I think we get stuck here very easily. There are a number of people in our world who will disqualify themselves as being people of value. That say, Jesus doesn't really value me. He can't possibly. I remember sitting in an office one day, or coming to the office one day, and somebody who just came and wanted prayer, and he wanted prayer for his friend, and I began to talk to him, and he says to me, no. God can't actually forgive what I've done. I don't qualify as being valuable enough for Jesus to care. Or maybe somebody will say, I don't deserve to be forgiven. Yeah, you don't. I mean, that's the definition of forgiven. If you deserved it, it would just be merit. It would be pay. It would be deserved. But it's forgiveness. And of course you don't deserve it. You don't deserve it in that sense, but you are valuable enough that Jesus is willing to do this. That he loves so much that you are infinitely valuable. I I think one of the problems sometimes is our view of how we come up with the worth of something. That I don't think we understand. You know, we're so used to going to the store and we see a loaf of bread for $1.50, we think bread should cost $1.50. But I have to tell you, it hasn't always cost $1.50. There was times when it cost a whole lot less. And there will be times, probably in the future, it'll cost a whole lot more. It's not the price tag. The price tag doesn't determine its value. What determines its value is what someone is willing to pay for it. Do you understand that concept? Okay, maybe not. I've used this example before. Butt and Gwinnett. Remember the story? Oh my goodness, you don't remember it. Yes, okay. Declaration of Independence. Oh my goodness, this fits with 4th of July, right? So, Declaration of Independence, it's signed by all these people, and, you have George Washington on there, for example, right? So it's like, ooh, some guy gets a George Washington autograph and, signature and says, I'm going to collect this. This is awesome. And he has that. And how much is that cost or whatever? He can go get it. The thing is, George Washington signed tons of stuff. He signed tons of stuff. Banks would have him sign their little notes so that they would go, there's a reason he's on our dollar bill. Like, people had such a great view of George Washington, so his stuff's all over. And there are people that connect. But the rarest one on there, the most difficult one to get hold of, is by this guy named Butt and Gwinnett. And he's, for want of a better term in terms of history, he's nobody. Like, he died poor. He ended up having all this, I think there were scandals, whatever, but he didn't sign it. Nobody wanted his signature back in the day. It's really hard to find. There's very few of them. And in this podcast I was listening to, as they were talking about it, somebody asked, so what's a Butt and Gwinnett, a good Butt and Gwinnett signature worth? And I loved how the curator would not answer that directly, because he's asking a question. It's like, what's it worth? He goes, people will pay highly for this. Notice the distinction. Its value is not determined by me coming up with some number saying what it's worth. It's determined by what somebody was willing to pay for it. Jesus was willing to pay his life for you, for me, for these sinners. He determines the value. And so, regardless of how much you value yourself, Christ values you even more. We can't try to disqualify yourself as much as you want, but Scripture indicates that Jesus finds you infinitely valuable. The other problem, though, is that we often try to disqualify others from this. We disqualify others as saying they're not really as valued by God. Now, we almost never say that directly, but maybe it comes out in our behavior that the reason I don't really talk about Jesus with other people, the reason I don't really share the gospel, the reason I don't is I don't know, it's just too divisive. All it creates is arguments. So, as soon as you say that, what you're saying is, this is too much of a cost. Divisiveness, difficult conversations is too much of a cost. It's not, this person and their relationship with God is not worth difficulty in a difficult conversation. Or maybe we just say, it hurts feelings. People get their feelings hurt. Hurt feelings are more valuable than the fact that somebody may or may not know Jesus. That's what we say. We're disqualifying them. Their life, their beliefs, whatever, it's not valuable enough for me to risk how they might see me, having a hard conversation, bringing up Jesus, whatever. It's not worth it. We have disqualified their value, where Jesus says they are infinitely valuable. I mean, right? Isn't it really what we do? There's a grate out here right in front of the church, and stuff falls in there all the time. And I have to tell you, if there's a pile of pennies and they fell down the grate, I was not interested in trying to get them out of there. I wasn't interested. It wasn't worth it. If I dropped my phone down there, I'd find a way to do it. I'd find a way to open that grate. Like, it matters because that I value. You see what we're saying? How much do you value, and do you value it the same way, obviously, that Jesus does? But he's saying the reason I need you to share, the reason I need you to kind of point, the reason you might even need to argue a little bit, is because these people are so valuable to me. Secondly, the other thing Jesus is saying is that people, even the righteous, are hopelessly lost. Hopelessly lost. I think this one is far more common, right? You've heard the story of Jesus and the lost sheep, right? There's this lost sheep and the shepherd, 99. So we say, okay, well, Jesus is the good shepherd. He's going to leave the 99 to find the one. And we come up with some nice little picture of Jesus and this lamb that's, oh, it's so cute. And I think this picture is horrible. Because it's not at all what's going on, right? Why did the sheep take off? Why is that sheep no longer there? Because the sheep is stupid. Dumb. Like it thinks something that is radically untrue. It thinks, I'm going to be fine. I don't need this shepherd for protection. I don't need this shepherd for provision. I'm just going to hang out. I'm just going to go. I'm going to go out on my own. I've got this. And the reason I say it's dumb is because how many herds of wild sheep do you see anymore? Right? Sheep, we have spent so many centuries domesticating them. I mean, I guess there probably are some wild sheep things still, but a domesticated sheep, like they don't go and you take some horses, take a few horses and kind of let them off on their own. They'll eventually come up to be a herd and they'll find a way to make it. The sheep don't. The sheep are not set. They are not built for this. They are not driven for this. They cannot provide for themselves. They are nothing but prey, and they can't run. Like, it's just bad. And so here's this sheep out there that's wandered away, and Jesus is going to have to, or the shepherd, presumably, the shepherd's going to have to go find him, get him, and the sheep probably isn't going like, oh, there's the shepherd, I'm so excited to be back. No, he probably had to drag him kicking and screaming, throw him over his shoulder, get him back, throw him in the herd, and say, you're going to be there. The reason I think this is so important, unlike this cute little sheep who's finally glad to be in the arms of Jesus, is the fact that the story of the coin, the story of the lost sheep, I think it's so clear, it has to be understood that the sheep, the coin, they have no role in being rescued. There's nothing they have to do to be rescued. It's simply the shepherd, the widow that's willing to find the woman, the shepherd that says, I will find you, I will search, I will gather, I will do. And they say, okay, Bill, but he's got the story of the prodigal son here. And he clearly did do something. He repented and came back. I knew you'd fall for that one. We call it the story of the prodigal son. You know what the word prodigal means, by the way? I always think this is funny. Because people talk, it's like, oh, the prodigal son. They almost always think it means the returning son. That's not what prodigal is wasteful. The fact that he was out there spending everything and all that, that's what made him prodigal, not the coming back. When he's doing all that. So the story of the prodigal son. I even included, you'll see in the slides, if you looked real closely, it says the story of the prodigal son, because that's what they title it. But that's not what Jesus titles it. He doesn't start off the parable going, let me tell you about this really crazy son. This guy had a son and he did this. What does he say? What does he start off with? Do you remember? 2 sons. Absolutely. Man had 2 sons. See, he's telling a story about 2 sons. He's telling the story about the sinner and the story about the righteous. He's telling the story about the guy who took off and has to come back to the father, and the father running out to meet him when he finally does. So excited to be with him. But he tells the other story. Remember the themes of these passages, these parables. Lost, found, celebration, right? Here is this son. I don't know, you'll see it if you read it this week. This oldest son, there's a party going on, and he won't show up because he's bitter, because he's angry, because I am better. I am righteous. You should be rewarding me, not this one. You should have been for me and my friends. You should do this, not for him and his. I don't think, especially being the third story, that the Pharisees could have mistaken anything but the fact that he was talking about them. That their idea that they qualify as the non-sinners, they qualify as the righteous, and these other people qualify as the sinners, means they're not really lost. They're not broken. Just these others are. And Jesus is trying to break through and say, you've got to understand, you are lost. You are just as lost, just as outside of the rejoicing and the joy and the party. because of your righteousness as that person is because of their brokenness. Does that sound crazy? You think you've got it figured out, and you think you're righteous, and so you're lost because of it. See, the gospel is the story of the fact, for what it's worth, I mean, there's a whole theology behind the fact that our righteousness and the sin and they really come from the same root of pride and all that stuff. But I just want to take it at the surface level. That what Jesus says at some point is that you are lost just as much because you think you've got it together as those who know they don't. Matter of fact, if we could even read into the story of the prodigal son, if we're going to call it that the prodigal son was even closer to coming back because he knew he was broken, he knew he was in need, and the older brother never recognized it. The gospel, as properly understood, annoys religious people. It annoys the people that think they're good enough. They don't, okay, I get it, I blow it and Jesus forgives me and that's cool, but not those people. Like those people are more likely to be annoyed. The people who think that are more likely to be annoyed by the true story of the gospel than anyone else. And if that surprises you, like you've never heard that before, that the righteous and the religious and the people who think they've got it together are just as lost, and maybe even more so than the broken and the sinner. If that has never occurred to you before, then can I encourage you to please relook at the story of Jesus? That you must admit, at least have the intellectual honesty that says, maybe I've misunderstood. Maybe what I've been taught and what is shown was through these other grids and these other understandings that is not consistent with Jesus. Please look into that. Does it anger you? The idea that God would forgive the worst among us? Then we are much more like the older brother, much more like the Pharisees than we want to admit. Sum it up in these two ways. The reason Jesus wants to argue, the reason these points is to understand that you and I are more lost than we could ever realize. And I mean that literally. Like, there are probably some things about me, I can almost guarantee there are things about me that are broken that I'm not even aware of. That I am more broken than I realize. That I think, well, I've got that kind of together. And Jesus is like, no, Bill, not even that. You are more broken than you realize, Bill. You need me so desperately. There is nothing you're going to do on your own that's going to be good enough, that's going to get close enough, it's not about you. To understand we are more broken than we realize, and second, that we are more loved than we could ever hope. Because I hope a lot. There are parts about me that I do know that I'm not very proud of, and I don't want you to see it. And I don't want my neighbors to see it, and frankly, I don't want to see it myself. Because I know that if you really saw the depths of who I was, you wouldn't like me very much. And so I hide, and so I don't show you, and I live a life of trying to be comfortable and normative and let people see just the parts about me so I think they'll like me, but then I realize they don't really know me, and I'm in this trap of like, well, if they did know me, they wouldn't love me, so I'd rather they at least like me and not know me, but then I'm lonely and not loved. And Jesus says, I fully know you. I fully love you, and I'm coming for you. So what do we do with that? I want to make this challenge for you. Would you be willing to have a conversation with somebody about that this week? Maybe there's somebody in your family, somebody that you've talked to, somebody you've never really been bold enough about. And I'm not saying you need to share the entire story, but just enough to just bring God into the conversation. Would you be willing to do that in ways maybe you haven't before? Maybe it's with a child, maybe it's with a parent, maybe it's a neighbor. I don't know. But are you willing to do that? And I don't know, but did you catch it? Did you catch it? It's like it's also clear not only why we do this, but what it is we were talking about. I believe those two categories, you are more lost than you could ever imagine, and you are more loved than you could have ever hoped. These are so fundamental to the human experience that almost any conversation will touch, if it gets deep enough, will touch on one of those two categories. That somebody needs to hear, of course you're broken, of course you're lost. Yes, there is one, even Christ Jesus, who can speak to your condition. Or I have disappointed myself, I have broken, I am just unloved and unlovely, and to say you are more valuable than anything else to Christ. What will you do with that? Do you accept it yourself? Do you learn and remind yourself week in, week out? Do you let Jesus and Scripture argue with you to challenge you to be more open to those realities? And are you willing to share that with others? Let's pray. Well, Lord, I think really at the root of it, I don't believe it. At one level, I don't believe in my lostness. I believe that some areas, sure, I'm only human, but that other areas, I just, I don't even give you the time of day to deal with these things in my life because I'm so busy just like, oh yeah, that doesn't matter. So Lord, I'm going to consider it grace when I read your word and something challenges me and breaks apart my grid. I'm going to see it as grace when you point out that I've been trying to do these things on my own. I'm going to see it grace when you call out my sin. And in that moment of desperation, when I see that I am broken and that I am hopelessly lost, that there is indeed hope. Because you love me more than I could have ever have hoped. And so, Lord, once again, I submit myself to that. I ask for your forgiveness for wandering off, for thinking I've got it on my own, for being a stupid sheep or a dumb coin or whatever it is, being the prodigal son. Lord, I come back to you. And to see you run towards me with your arms open wide and say, this is what I want and this is why we rejoice. So Lord, help me join the party. And to party with others who come to you. Let us be people of the party. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's have a few moments of open worship. If God puts something on your heart, you can certainly share it. I'll close this in a couple minutes.